I think the world is looking on at this coming election and saying, and a lot of the world hates Trump. Okay, it's not an endorsement of Trump, but it's just true. If Joe Biden gets reelected, democracy is a freaking joke.
Hey everyone, me Kevin here. I just went through Tucker Carlson's 3-hour interview with Lex Fridman, and in this video you're going to get a full distillation along with my opinion on some of the most salient parts, the most important things. Let's start. First, I was surprised that Tucker Carlson said he thought Putin was nervous when he sat down with Tucker Carlson, that Putin was like a nervous student ready to provide his version of history. Tucker suggested this was probably because a lot of eyeballs were going to be on this interview, but Tucker also later in the interview suggested that Putin has been not surrounded by enough people. Tucker is a big fan, you find this throughout the entire interview, so I'll just say it once here. Tucker is a big fan of people, being around perspective, being told when he's wrong, having his opinions challenged, believing that there is a higher power, believing that nobody knows all the answers, and going as far as arguing. And if you watch the entire 3-hour interview, you'll see that this is so consistent. He goes as far as arguing that we are potentially becoming stupider thanks to the access to technology that we have today. These were some really powerful connections from this interview. I mean, think about that for a moment. Tucker talks about in the 90s, thinking about a future where we have access to all of this information. But Tucker says that wisdom does not come from having access to information. It comes from knowing what you do not know. And that could be even harder, and suggests that maybe what we're seeing in South Korea, for example, where South Korea is becoming obsessed with Western technology, Western social media, what are we finding? Higher suicide rate, lower birth rate, and a lower standard of living, things that we're also seeing in the United States. Why is this? If technology is so good, why are 3 cornerstones of how well things are going in society suggesting things are actually getting worse and not better? Now, he mentions very clearly that he is a big fan of everybody having children as soon as possible. That is the most pure form of creation that you could possibly express. Have children. And he suggests to the people who say, well, I don't have the means to have a child. He gives a very strong argument. He says, and he says this about men because he is a man. He says, look, I don't know about women, but when it comes to men, unless you are forced to do something, you will not do it. And so, when you have a child, you become responsible and you make it happen. This was a very interesting argument. It kind of sets the stage, given that a lot of that was discussed towards the end of the interview. It sets the stage for how this interview went. This was a really open look into who Tucker is as a person. See, Tucker was asked, hey, were you afraid of going to Russia and dying? He said, no, I wasn't afraid of dying in Russia. I believe in God. I didn't drink the tea they offered, but I was not afraid going into Russia. I was more afraid actually of coming back to the United States. He says he spent thousands of dollars on attorneys to tell him and brief him that he could be arrested for sanction violations by going to interview Putin and then coming back. He was more afraid that the America he loves had become twisted than being arrested or killed in Russia. Now, it's worth noting that we go a little bit deeper here into Tucker and the spying on Tucker, but we're on Putin, and we should stick to Putin for a moment because that's where this interview starts out, and so we'll go a bit more chronologically here. Tucker Carlson believes it is odd to suggest that Ukraine is on the verge of winning. He believes that Ukraine is a tool for corporations and politicians to line their pockets and enrich themselves. He says that Boris Johnson demanded $1 million to be interviewed by Tucker Carlson. Now, some might say that Boris Johnson is just trying to blow off Tucker Carlson. On the other hand, people might be scratching their head going, Tucker wants to confront Boris Johnson on why Putin says Boris Johnson killed the Ukrainian peace deal. Tucker believes that a lot of institutions, companies, the weaponization or military-industrial complex is all lining their pocket off the backs of Ukrainian lives. And Tucker believes that's disgusting. And he also believes the assertion that Ukraine is close, we just need to give them some more money, is ludicrous. Now, I will say, a news organization that generally supports the Biden administration stance, the New York Times, just ran a piece a few days ago, and I'm pointing this out. Tucker didn't point this out, so I want to be exceptionally clear what's a Tucker argument and what's more of a sort of a Kevin point. Kevin point here. The New York Times runs a piece, surprisingly weak Ukrainian defensive, help Russian advance. And they show here trenches here and trenches here, but nothing in the middle, and suggest this sort of lopsided or uneven defense contributing to the loss of one particular region. All of this, by the way, my full notes of the Tucker Carlson show and this particular region, we've talked about this before in Ukraine, all of this is over on ehack.com. I always like to post my notes. This right here was, for example, an eHack from February 19th, where I talked about the fall of this very specific area, my video on it, some before and after images and control. So I do this. I always try to post information on ehack.com. It's actually a great way for me to organize my thoughts before I make my videos, and you're always welcome to use that source totally for free. But anyway, they compare this to Russia's trenches over here on the right, cleanly organized, the dragon's teeth to stop tanks from coming through, anti-tank ditches, and very clear Russian defenses, whereas Ukraine's defenses are actually substantially weaker. And this kind of reiterates what Tucker says, that no, maybe Ukraine isn't actually close. Anyway, he expresses that he's sad that Navalny died. He thinks that no opposition leader should be in jail. This is not freedom. He does not at any point claim that Russia is free or that Russia has free speech. But he does suggest, hey, it's kind of ridiculous that for us to go to a grocery store, we have to step over homeless people with pee and urine on the floor and, frankly, fentanyl-laced individuals, drugged up individuals, and that people don't even feel safe in America anymore. So he's drawing this contrast. And I have to say, as somebody who ran for governor in California during the recall election, and I came in second place with nearly 1 million votes, I have to say, Tucker's right here. Our homeless problem is solvable. The problems in America are solvable. The issue is our priorities are highly misaligned. Now, that's really a topic for a different video. Let's keep going with Tucker Carlson. Although if you do want more of my opinions on finance, we do have an event coming up on June 21st. It's a finance symposium, innovation, finance, real estate. Learn how to become a millionaire through finance, real estate. Just go to meetkevin.com, learn more about the event. It's in Vegas. So you'll meet me and a ton of speakers still to be announced in person, June 21st to June 23rd. Continuing now. Tucker Carlson says he met Edward Snowden, for dinner at his hotel room. And he didn't tell anybody about it. But all of a sudden, Semaphore runs a piece breaking that Tucker Carlson met with Snowden. Tucker says, how did they know? Tucker, who acknowledges, as well as other media outlets who have acknowledged that the NSA has spied on Tucker Carlson, suggests that the NSA and maybe even the CIA are still spying on Tucker Carlson. And he's told that there is no such thing as a secure messaging platform. Maybe it's secure from the mafia, but not from the government. And the worst part is, all the spyware leads your phone battery to die faster. He's interjecting comedy here, obviously, but then he gets serious. He says, how many of these moral fights, quote unquote moral fights that we have, like his example, Black Lives Matter, actually helped black people? Did suicide rates go down for blacks? Did the standard of living go up for blacks? Did the median income go up for blacks? Did beauty in a society go up? Did safety go up? Did cleanliness go up after BLM? Tucker Carlson says no. That you have whites perpetuating this moral victory, and the reality is the lives of blacks are not getting better. And so white people go on these crusades that don't actually improve the standard of living for anyone. There's also this idea, or at least this idea, that sanctions are not destroying Russia. If anything, they're making our issues in America worse. Sanctions haven't crippled Russia, at least per Tucker Carlson's point of view. Goes to a grocery store, everything's readily available, and adjusted per exchange rates, kind of affordable at grocery stores. Maybe even way more affordable than they are in America. So why is it that we're sanctioning Russia when it's not working, or at least it's not affecting the everyday individual, that Russia still has a wartime economy? In other words, a functioning economy. They seem to be fine. Why are we doing this when all we're really doing is driving the growth of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, to create their own currency and dump the US dollar? Now, side note, this is a Kevin note. I'm a big believer that it's going to be a while before the dollar is no longer king. But yes, at some point in the future, all currencies do collapse. They're all essentially a rigged Ponzi, and we just have to know the rules of those games and not touch currencies. I'm a big believer that the best dollar to have is no dollar, that you should exchange that dollar for assets that hopefully go up in time and value, and it doesn't matter what you denominate your asset in, it's still going to have value, whereas the actual dollar gets printed away via inflation. Okay, moving on. So Tucker's not wrong about that one. The effect of the sanctions, well, those can be debated, obviously. As far, because quite frankly, if you looked at, just as a quick example, and a counterpoint to Tucker Carlson, if you looked at the Russian airline industry, you'll notice they're falling apart. They have resorted to using planes they've taken out of service to use parts to put into existing planes that are still operating, but air safety is actually rapidly degrading in Russia, and it's only a matter of time until there are more commercial accidents, because they don't have access, thanks to sanctions, to the proper replacement parts for Boeings or Airbuses or otherwise. That's just an example of a counterpoint. Again, I'm not here to try to counter Tucker. It's just maybe you won't necessarily see the impact of sanctions at a grocery store, and I just want to provide that counterbalancing point of view that, yes, there are other industries you could look at and say the exact opposite. Tucker argues that he doesn't trust the internet. Instead, he trusts what he sees. Again, his grocery store example. He thinks that most media is just a tool for the American government. He thinks there are gross tax loopholes like carried interest, and we're creating chaos in the world off the backs of Ukrainians. Touched on that already before. He called George W. Bush a bitch for leaving when the Pentagon was attacked on 9/11. Leaving to essentially a protected camp under the guidance of the Secret Service. He argued that we have to define what a Nazi is, because for Putin to make this what Tucker Carlson calls a childish claim that we need to denazify Ukraine, well, hold on a second. While Nazism can evoke racism and evil and, essentially emotion, we have to define what a Nazi is today, otherwise we're never going to solve this war. How? Okay, let's negotiate. Let's get rid of all the Nazis. Okay, which ones? How do we define them? This is an interesting argument that Tucker Carlson makes. He also suggests that Kamala Harris told Ukraine that they could join NATO. I did pull up the White House point of view on this, and I understand each of these are going to be biased, right? Tucker doesn't like the White House doesn't like Tucker, or vice versa. But I do think it's very interesting, and so I posted this on ehack.com as well. I posted a snippet here, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris, responds to the idea of the desire of Ukraine to join NATO. And this is Kamala Harris's response. Well, I'll put that in context, because it's obvious at this point, which is that. And therefore, no other country can tell anyone whether they should or should not join NATO. That should be their independent choice. That is the point of sovereignty. So I respect Zelensky's desire to be a member of NATO. NATO is a membership. It's about nations coming together as a group, making decisions collectively. Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't happen overnight. Notice, in fairness to Tucker Carlson here, at no point does Kamala Harris reject the idea of Ukrainian membership in NATO. Instead, Kamala Harris, per the White House's own website, suggests, we can all collectively talk about it. There's no rejection of the idea that Ukraine should join NATO, and this happened in February of 2022, right before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I have to say, if I have to pick a side here, Tucker is probably more right in saying Kamala Harris essentially invited Ukraine to join NATO, because there was certainly not a clear closed door here, which previously there had been. Interesting. Anyway, continuing on. He talked a little bit about there being a lag in how there were translators and maybe a lack of chemistry in the interview because of that. And of course, maybe he could have asked, harder questions, but he kind of then quickly transitioned to this idea of, look, I don't really care what other people think about me. I spend time with my family, nature, and my values. He says, I love Elon, but I don't spend time on social. He thinks that Western technology is debilitating and that you're a megalomaniac if you're constantly looking to see what other people people think about you online, that your desire to be liked by people who don't know you is delusional. This was very interesting and very relatable, actually. As a content creator on social media, it's very easy, and I know this feeling very well, it's very easy to get absorbed in what other people and what society thinks of you when only you know your own truth. And I have to say, I love that idea. I think that was actually a very good point of view by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson says that we need to live a life of reproduction, sobriety, and better life expectancy. That's how you measure success in society. And that he's concerned that those things aren't happening now. And he's also concerned about how AI could maybe, even if there's just a 15% chance, take over society, or potentially that we're messing with people's brains by suggesting we should be implanting chips into people's brains, that there's a magic and sort of this arcaneness of brain that should be left untouched. Okay, there are arguments here on both sides. A quick counter argument might be, should we not help somebody, let's say with cerebral palsy, who could benefit from having a chip implant in their brain and actually then become a normal acting member of society? There are going to be arguments on both sides of this. Tucker Carlson did respond to the Donald Trump text messages. Tucker's argument is that he was mad, that Trump was making all of these claims. Tucker wanted to substantiate these claims, but all of the people around Trump were so incompetent, and that they brought him bad evidence, like giving him names of people who were still alive when they said they were dead and voted. Information directly from their campaign that frustrated Tucker Carlson. So Tucker said, yes, I was mad. He also says, yes, I have lied. I don't want to be a liar. I don't want to be known as a liar. I make mistakes. And I think Tucker's actually very reasonable for arguing what he does here. I know that time he is talking about, and it was a very frustrating time. Now, Tucker then goes further and says that the election was rigged. Tucker believes that when you censor information about COVID, you affect the way people vote. When you change the way people vote with more vote by mail, potentially ballot harvesting or otherwise, you change the way elections are held. And Tucker says people need fair access to information. And today, he suggests that the 2024 election is a referendum on Biden, that Biden is senile and he won't win unless the election is rigged. Now, I want to be very clear. This is Tucker Carlson's point of view. Of course, there's a likelihood that about half of Americans watching this believe that that is inappropriate. But this is Tucker Carlson's point of view. Lex counters and says, what if he's just getting old? And Tucker says, Biden is the leader of America. It's important for a leader to be able to lead. And the fact that Mar-a-Lago could be raided over a documents charge is crazy, especially when the sitting president had the same charge. He suggests that Nikki Haley is weak and that society should not let her advance. He says he has enormous interest in interviewing Xi Jinping, and that Joe Rogan has changed media. And Tucker wishes he had a resume like Rogan, going from Fear Factor to comedy to the forefront of media. He thinks that Joe Rogan is a very curious person, like Larry King was. He also goes then into relationships and suggests he could never be happier, that he's been with his wife for 40 years, and one of the ways he's been able to do that is his wife doesn't care about his job. He thinks having that separation is actually very important, and that there's a humility in accepting reality, that you don't control everything, both good and bad, that there is luck and that there is misfortune. And recognizing that is recognizing humility. Then the interview is over. So I hope you appreciated my less than 20-minute summary of the Tucker Carlson interview with Lex. I do encourage you to watch it, but if at the very least you were able to get this and get some perspective here, consider subscribing for more summaries or perspectives from me on finance or politics or otherwise. Subscribe to the channel. Check out the event we've got over at meetkevin.com with the courses on building your wealth, or check out ehack.com just to see where my head is. I usually recommend you just check it once per day. And with that, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.